Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you.
Hey, Connected Life peeps, Justin here, and super excited for today's podcast. I have one of my favorite people on with us today. Abby will not be joining us, and that's because Barry and I wanted to have some intimate space to talk about how messed up I have been inside of my marriage. Barry's chuckling in the background. I can see him. Today, we're going to get into talking with someone who has been a profound part of my personal journey and part of the journey of repair inside of Abby and I's relationship. So for those of you who don't know, Abby and I have been one of the avenues. We're always like on a journey of self-development and working through the messiness inside of our heart. And over the last couple of years, one of the things that we've been deliberately diving into is some of the early history and the way that we functioned inside of our marriage. So for Abby and I, you guys who have listened for long term know that we were like what we called Italian couples, an Italian couple, right? And I am part Italian, so I can tell you, speaking from firsthand experience, Italians fight hard and love hard. And fighting hard looked like a lot of messes that left a lot of brutal pain for us, where the communication wasn't done in love, and there was a lot of fear and anxiety between the two of us. And that turned into us raging at each other and calling each other names, and then finding pieces of repair for those moments that were profound for us. And they were bringing levels of resolve that was incredibly necessary and healing for us at that stage. And as we all know, there are phases of healing that happen as we're like human onions. And it's like, oh, I have the capacity to look at this and get some resolution, but I need some more ego strength to go deeper into some of these places. And so as we've peeled back the layers in the last couple of years, one of the things that we've been deliberate about doing is sitting down and counseling about those early years and peeling back any layers of denial or dissociation that we had over how much we were affected by that behavior. And one of the people that has been brought into our space to help facilitate that is my good friend and counselor, Barry McGarrah. Did I say that right? McGarrah.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
McGarrah.
Yeah.
There it is. And one of the things that's happened bringing Barry into this space, even personally with me, is that he's had the capacity to be incredibly compassionate and understanding and attuning, and be able to see. One of the things that I really value is when someone can just see you in the midst of your messiness and see the beauty of who you are through that messiness, and can continue to call you back to the truth of your being. Like, oh, this is who you are, and this is what's inside of you. And that has been profound, having Barry step into that. He has such a strength in attuning and connecting to someone's heart with compassion. But also, one of the things that's really foundational for what he does is he really works in the arena with couples on attachment theory and attachment styles, and helping people through attachment woundings. And we're going to get into a conversation today specifically about that, and formative environmental woundings, 3 of the formative environmental woundings that cause kind of shape our, right, it would be that be the way to say it, Barry. It shapes the way that we attach.
Yep, correct.
Yeah. So before we let Barry loose to blow all of your minds, I do want to say we are in the final weeks of signing up for the Pathway to Freedom. And for those of you who have been listening along, the Pathway to Freedom is a course that helps shine a spotlight on your emotions, these triggered areas inside of your life, and says, hey, your emotions aren't actually here to hijack your life. They're actually here to heal your life. They're here to shine a light on something that's needing repair. And the Pathway to Freedom is there to actually create a space of empowerment and personal ownership where we're not suddenly powerless to our spouses or our friends or our bosses, but we're able to actually begin to navigate the pain inside of our own hearts, get ahas about what our emotions are trying to do for us, and then move forward past these points of trauma into a victorious lifestyle. So if you're wanting to partake in that, that's a 10-week course, and that begins September 15th. So we're getting really close to the end of signups for that. You can go to Justin and Abby, that's abi.com, and go to our courses page and find the pathway to freedom there. So with that said, Barry, how'd you like that lead in for you? Did that sound flattering enough?
Yeah. You make me sound too good, man. I'm actually a very normal guy like the rest of you guys listening.
Yeah, he's a normal superhero. That's what he is.
All right.
He's like, oh, okay, Justin, I'll take it. Barry, you're such a kind guy and a humble guy. Go ahead, tell the people how you're humble, Barry.
Oh my gosh. Humbleness comes through a lot of humiliation. So I have definitely had my time of being humiliated.
Yeah, me too. So with that said, how long have you been doing, you're explain to everybody your different modalities of counseling that you do.
Sure. Well, for one, thank you for letting me be on here with you. This is a treat and an honor. I don't take this lightly. And for all of you who have got to interact with Justin, what's not to love? Him and Abby are just two of the most wonderful people that you'll ever meet. So thank you for letting me be here, for one. It's a joy. And I have to say, historically in my life, I've been a pastor. I got married at 19, started being a pastor at 19 as well. 10 years into pastoring and 10 years into marriage. My marriage was a disaster, unbeknownst to me.
Yeah, no idea. I thought everything was great.
Yeah, everything's fine. My wife's like, hey, we need to go get counseling. And I was like, what are you talking about? Everything's fine. And she's like, we can't talk about all these things. And I'm like, so can't other couples. It's fine. Anyways, she conned me into going to counseling.
I like that.
So for the next 10 years of my life, or for the next year of my life, we did couples therapy. And it was deeply transformative. I can't say it any other way. I was so thankful that she conned me into getting into it. So if there's anybody out there and you're like, yeah, counseling's not for me, me too. I tried to say no too. And it changed my life. So after that, I had done kind of some pastoral counseling, but after that year of marriage therapy, I just faked doing whatever our therapist did for us. I faked it with everybody else I worked with. And at some point, I kind of had this inkling inside that said, yeah, you should probably go get schooling and figure out actually how to do this. So I've been doing pastoral counseling for a lot of years. I got into the field of marriage and family therapy full time in 2018. And so I've been doing this full time for about 6 years.
Wow.
Now.
I love it. You've been doing it for 6 years, but it feels like you've been doing it a lifetime because you're so wonderful at it. I can't help but kind of giggle at the idea that pastors are expected to know everything without training. Like, hey, help me with my marriage, help me with my future. And they're like, well,
yeah.
Here's a scripture I think that works with that. It's like, thanks for the good try, but
I got one pastoral counseling class in Bible college, and good luck, kid. And oh my gosh, yeah, a lot of it was faking it those early years, and I have no clue.
I have so much compassion on the messes that pastors make, because a lot of times people will come into my space and just be like, from the institutional background, and they'll just be like, oh, this pastor caused so many problems. Da, 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 da. I'm like, yeah, they were trying their best, though. They were thrown into the deep end of the pool and told, you got enough to swim, boy.
Oh, so
it.
True.
So
I'm so sorry. If you're listening and that was me, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh man, it was a deep end, and trying to figure out how to navigate some of that was really tricky.
Yeah. It so is. So that, what I hear is that, you became passionate about human relationships inside of it. And you were also seeing like tangible transformation through the tools that you had gotten.
Yeah. So I kind of came away from that year of marriage therapy. And at the end of it, I told God, like, if you wanted me to give the rest of my life to helping couples, I would do it. And I think he took that seriously. And so I went back to school, and I knew I was going to be a marriage therapist. So I went and got my marriage and family therapy degree. And I was determined that whatever our therapist did for us, that's what I'm going to look for. And that's the kind of therapy I'm going to do. So as I was in school, we were learning about all these kind of therapy modalities, and we eventually got to emotion-focused therapy. And as soon as I read about emotion-focused therapy, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that is exactly what was used on us. And in that moment, I knew that is what I'm going to give my life to when it comes to couples therapy, is becoming an emotion-focused therapist.
Now, what is emotional focused therapy for those that might not know, or just kind of like a 30,000 foot bird's eye view of it?
Yeah. Great question. Essentially, there are two gold standards when it comes to couples therapy. And one is emotion-focused therapy. It's been around for 30 some years. It's a researched and evidence-based therapy, which means there's been a ton of research done on what it does, how it does it, the kind of interventions it uses. And it's an attachment-based therapy, which attachment theory, while it's still semi-new, it has become like the theory that is behind human relationships. And so emotion-focused therapy is one of the gold standards. The other is Gottman therapy.
Yeah.
They're heavily researched as well.
They are.
And they're incredible as well. And they're two different kind of are two different modalities. So they approach things totally different.
Yeah.
And so there are lots of different couples therapy modalities out there. But these are kind of the two gold standards there. And the gold standard, what makes them gold standard is there's evidence and research that proves that they work.
Right.
And that's the thing for me. I don't want to spend my time, and I don't want people to spend their time or money working with me, and I'm just shooting from the hip, hoping that this thing works.
Yeah. Yeah, that's reasonable. Yeah, I know that I think historically, I have a deep value for people working in the emotional health field. I've seen experiences where there's a lot of talk therapies and stuff that, though people are feeling heard, they're not seeing the momentum. There's certain things that happen. And so cycles may be in for unnecessarily 10, 15 years, and then come back and they're like, I've spent 10, 15 years just talking across from someone, but there wasn't like resolution happening. And so that's not across the board. I'm just saying that, like, when you find something, right, where there's tangible results, like you said, that they were able to look and go, oh, we are actually getting results. Here's what's happening inside of this, how things are changing. That's so relieving for people to be able to participate in that. And I can understand that you're like, oh, wow, this is actually yielding results. Of course I want to do this because I want to see change inside of people's worlds. It changed my life. I wanted to see it change other people's lives.
Yeah. And, if you've been around therapy or in therapy, research tells us, and your experience probably shows that it's true, that working with the right person makes a huge difference.
That does.
Like if there's 100% that's possible, 70% probably is all in working with the right person.
Yeah.
The modality matters, but working with the right person is just critical to the process.
Yeah. One of the things, even speaking on that, like when Barry's said that he's committed to doing for people, especially even the modality that was done with him, but even giving away what was given to him, this concept, like the truth is that probably, Barry, your involvement in the last couple of years saved our marriage, I would say, in the sense of like, oh, when this pain was being turned up, I don't know, as us looking at it, if I didn't have the landing place of both your personality type and both, not just that, but also your understanding of certain things, where I was able to go, oh, I can be at peace through this as we look under the covers at this thing and not freak out and then pull the ripcord or something. And so, yeah, it's been very powerful. And everyone who's listening right now has benefited the last couple of years because of just Barry being in the background for me. So.
Well, thanks, man. You are a testament to just love and commitment, loyalty and resiliency. So, and it's really cool when you see somebody who is really dedicated to their marriage, dedicated to being better and being whole. And it's not really hard work when you're working with somebody like that. So just want to give you props too, that it takes two to tango.
Yeah, man. What I want to say to you is you're welcome.
I
gave you an amazing client to work with, and you're very welcome, Barry.
Oh, that's so great. Your humor is off the charts, man.
It's ridiculous.
I love that about you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take it.
Great.
So, with that said, going into the attachment conversation, like you said, it's kind of like one of the gold standards and something that's really rising up across the world where people are like attachment. Mm-hmm. Why don't you kind of lay out, if you would, more a little bit about what attachment theory looks like, if that's helpful, or if you want to start there, or if you want to start with talking about the environmental woundings that lead to it, or I don't know.
Sure. For those that maybe attachment's a new word or a new concept, attachment is an emotional bond with another person.
Right.
And the central theme of attachment theory is that primary caregivers, this is, typically our moms and dads, they're available and responsive to an infant's needs. And in doing so, it allows the child to develop a sense of security, right? So when a baby cries and mom or dad picks them up and they're crying because they need their diaper change or they're hungry and they get the diaper change and they get the bottle or the whatever fed, it gives them a sense of security. They know that when I call, they'll answer me.
Right.
And that's security, is knowing that when we call, our most important loved one will be there. So when an infant knows that the caregiver is dependable, it creates a secure base for the child to then explore the world. So if you think about like a baby who's learning how to crawl, right? You'll put them down, they'll crawl across the room, they'll get to the couch or the chair, they'll pull themselves up and they'll look back at mom or dad. And if they feel secure, they'll get down and they'll crawl further away. And they'll crawl to the next couch and they'll pull themselves up and they'll look back at mom or dad. And if they feel safe and they feel secure, they'll crawl away even further.
Because something's
Isn't that
developed.
The cool thing?
Yeah, because something in the back of them that goes, hey, my confidence is building because I know that the love and the care and the attention is there. So then a child goes, I'm going to push myself further than I would have felt comfortable with and try things and explore new things because there's something there that's going to catch me or take care of me or show up. Yep. If I get into problems over here or pain, they're going to show up and take care of it.
Yep. I can call from across the room and my mom and dad will come get me.
Right.
That's security.
That's great.
So when that works, it's awesome. Children who have secure attachments, they can depend on their caregivers. They can show distress when they're separated. They can show joy when they're reunited. And although a child might be upset or they might feel like not good, they can feel assurance that their caregiver will return, will care for them. So whether they're frightened or whether they're upset, securely attached children are comfortable seeking reassurance from caregivers.
Right.
And that's a really important thing. If you feel comfortable seeking reassurance from caregivers, that is one of the major signs that you have secure attachment.
What do you see? Can I ask a question? See, so a kid that has secure attachment and they can seek comfort like that, what does that look like as adults, like in how that they show up to life? Have you noticed that there's something specific that you're like, oh, I can tell immediately that this person had secure attachments?
Yeah. Great question. And a picture's worth 1,000 words, isn't it?
Yeah. So
when we talk about a picture of a child crawling across the room because they feel secure that they can cry at any moment and mom and dad will come swooping and picking them up, that says a whole bunch. In therapy, it's not uncommon to find husbands and wives or their partners with certain insecurities. One of the insecurities that I see that's common in females in our culture, in American culture, and I work in the Northwest, so this could be unique to Northwest, but I think it's more common to just the United States culture, is that females can feel insecure about having needs. They can feel too needy. They don't or can't express a need to their partner because they're afraid that they'll be seen as needy. Somehow along the way, growing up, they get this message: don't be needy, don't be needy. And in so doing, it makes them have an insecure attachment. And so they don't look to their husbands with their needs. And instead of just saying, hey, I need you to, or I need to have this with you, more time, more conversation, they more make demands instead of asking for their needs to be met. They'll make demands like, how come you didn't mow the lawn? How come you didn't put the dishes away? And in so doing, it's their kind of way of asking for their needs to be met without just coming out and saying, I need this from you. And that's just one. And I'm sorry if I'm generalizing. I don't mean to.
No, I don't think you're generalizing.
Generalize. It's just a common thing that I see with men that have insecure attachment in our culture. It's very normal for men to not show weakness, to not talk about their feelings, and to not show their hurt. It is not uncommon at all when a man's in my office and he's telling me about an experience with his wife to talk about some hurtful situation. And I'll say, gosh, that sounds like that really hurt. And the man will say, no, it didn't hurt. And I'd say, well, what was it then? What did it feel like? Well, it didn't hurt so much as it like, I guess it kind of hurt. Yeah. I guess now that you say that, I guess it did hurt. What's that like to acknowledge that hurt? Well, I don't like that. Us guys, we're not supposed to talk, we're not supposed to show pain, show weakness. That's whining. That's us not manning up. And so in that way, right, it's insecure that a man can't say that hurt and that didn't feel good. And can we not do that anymore? Or I need you to not do that anymore because that hurts me.
I think another phrase that men might use, like if you're like, well, if it didn't hurt, what did it feel like? I think a common phrase might be like, they were being assholes.
Right?
Like,
yep.
They were being assholes, huh?
Yep.
Nope, they're just big assholes. They're all a bunch of jerks. What a dick that guy was, my wife was, whatever, instead of being like, I felt hurt.
Yeah. That's so normal and common in our culture that we're taught to like point out when somebody's being a jerk or mean or harsh and not point out that it hurts and it causes me a pain when you do that. And that's part of the insecure attachment is we can't tell them that our need is for them to not hurt us like that.
Yeah. It is a really hard thing. I think about in my relationship with Abby, I didn't have words early on to look her in the face and say, hey, I'm really scared right now. And this feels really painful. I need you to be kind to me. This feels really like overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed. It's my overwhelm. I don't know how to, I want to be able to hear you, but I feel small. Instead it was just like, hey, quit being a jerk. Why are you railing at me? Why are you berating me? You're berating me. Quit berating me. Quit treating me like I'm an idiot. Stuff like that instead of like, oh, this just feels really scary and high stakes. And it reminds me of my childhood. And I feel like I'm going to get really, really hurt, really, really bad if this keeps going.
Yep. Which again is so important that we learn this attachment in our childhood. So as adults, it shows up, if it's insecure, if it's dysfunctional, it shows up in our adulthood. And, it's that same thing is like, it takes me back to being a kid and what it was like back then.
So what I hear is that like when you're working with an adult that has historical secure attachment, they're okay with expressing some form of need. It's just, hey, can I have this? Because the need got met as a kid, and they're okay with being like, hey, whether it's implementing a boundary or it's talking about a pain point inside of them and how they could use some care for that, but they can use their words to communicate that. So that's one expression of or sign that like, oh, I've got a level of secure attachment.
Yeah. So like, let's go back to emotion focused therapy for a second. So in emotion focused therapy, there are kind of 3 stages that we are walking through with couples. The first stage is de-escalation. We're just trying to get them out of that bad dance that they do with each other. Neither
we
one
had
is
some big bad
guy.
dances, didn't we?
He laughed. Who doesn't?
He laughed. He laughed at it. It's because it's true.
Oh my gosh. Yes, you guys, we all have we have our doozies. You guys definitely have yours. So,
you're not wrong.
And so, so we try to de-escalate that bad dance. Stage 2 is what we call restructuring the attachment.
Yeah.
And that is where we go back to our deepest fears and our deepest longings, and we highlight the needs that we have and ask for them to be met. So that is a part of the therapy. And that is how we restructure things to get it back to being a secure attachment.
Yeah. It's really good. What was the third part?
The third stage is consolidation. It's kind of like creating rituals and habits and tying a pretty bow on all the work that you've done and helping it be secure for the long term.
I love that. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back to insecure attachments, parents showed up well there. Is it just when we're kids crawling as babies, or can we create insecure attachments? Like maybe they were there for you as a kid, and then all of a sudden at 3, 4, 5, shit hits a fan, something falls apart, and then all of a sudden that gets shaken, or what's that like?
Yeah, great question. And this brings us into kind of what I think is really exciting for me to talk about and kind of unpack some more today with you. Is the 3 environmental woundings that's normal for a human to go through. I have great parents. The people that know my parents think they're wonderful, amazing. It's hard to find anybody that will say anything bad about my parents. I'm the third of 3 boys. And when I was, 4 or 5, my mom decided she wanted to go back to school to become a nurse. And so she did. So at 5, I had a secure attachment with my mom in the sense that she was always home. Anytime I needed something, she would be there to give it to me. I was well fed. I was given attention, all those things. And then one day she's gone. Well-intentioned, really good reason,
right?
Medical school or nursing school. So, but she's gone. And at 5, I only know what a 5-year-old knows. Mom's gone.
Yeah.
And thus begins a different trajectory for me in my attachment style with her, with my parents, and in turn with my wife.
Which also opens up a swirl inside a kid's head where an accusational voice can create whatever story. And it starts filling in blanks, right?
Yep. So true. And then we pick up these messages along the way, and those messages or those narratives or those stories become the main story we tell ourselves, and so on and so forth. What
happened for you, by the way? Just like, what was a message that got instituted for you inside of that?
Oh, yeah. Like I was, again, I wasn't important. My mom went back to school, so work was more important than me. Work is always more important than me. So, I'd see my dad love his job and go hard into work. And I would just tell myself, my dad loves his job more than me. I'd see my mom throw herself into her work and she loved it and she was great at it. And I just would tell myself, right, their jobs they have always been more important than me, which again is not true. My dad would tell you, like, his parents, he grew up poor. And so my dad determined in his head as a young boy, like, I am not going to raise my kids poor. So he worked hard. And he didn't work hard because he didn't love us. He worked hard to give us more and give us better than what he got. what message did I get? I got the message that my dad loves his job more than me.
Yes, which is,
See?
so many people would relate to that, especially within our culture, our productivity driven culture that's especially intense inside of American, as family units have gone, like mom and dad are all flying out of the house suddenly from being within the family in that tight knit nuclear space to all of a sudden we're gone. Maybe you're getting raised by a babysitter and you don't know why. And they're all going like, oh, all I see is jobs that somehow they're happy about being about, and they're grinding in those spaces. It must be that they don't care about me.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, I'm a pastor's kid. I'm a fourth generation pastor. So what did I think as a kid? The church was always more important than me. And so, you get people like Katy Perry or Madonna or these other pastors' kids that their life, their outcomes, their choices are partly because they had parents who seemingly were married to the church and the church was more important. And again, it's easy to fit that narrative, right? That my dad's job is more important than me. And so it's easy to pick up that wrong storyline and live that out. And
to be fair, I'm sure there are some parents that
absolutely
their job is more important than their kids. And that's realistic. But the truth is there's a lot of narrative that's filled in for a lot of people. And we don't find that out till years later when we're willing to have really brave and risk-taking conversations after connecting to our pain, becoming self-aware, and then being able to be like, I need to talk to my parents about this. And you find out like, no, honestly, I was dying going to that job every day. It was breaking my heart that I was missing moments with you, but I couldn't think of another way to make sure that you were provided for. And you're like, oh my gosh, I did not know. I so judged you in this.
Yep. So I had one of those conversations with my dad not too long ago. My dad, obviously poured himself into the church, loved the church, still hard to break away from it because he has such a deep calling and love for it. So one day I was telling him like, hey, as I walk back through some of these younger years of my life, I could see you at the church quite a bit. Did anyone ever tell you like, you're spending too much time here, you should go home? And he said, no, never. No one's ever told me that.
Wow.
And I said, really? Nobody ever told you like, you're here on a Saturday, you should be home with your kids and your family? Nobody ever said that to you? He goes, honest to God, I cannot remember ever one time somebody ever telling me I'm working too much. And I was like, wow, that is wild to think that so many people saw all that you did and nobody said like, you should go home, bro.
There was no environmental feedback.
There was nothing. So, I mean, again, there's that storyline in my head where I'm like, people I'm sure were telling them, go home, go home, go home. And the true story is that nobody told him to go home.
Yeah.
Nobody told him in the environment that he might be working too much or giving too much.
Which, as a side note, I want to say this for everyone listening. This is a prime example of choosing to proactively surround yourself with people who will lovingly check you. Not just in what it feels like is failures, but like, hey, I'm going to check you in the way of like, are you loving yourself well? Are you loving your family well? Are you rising up to who you were designed to be? Like they're holding you accountable to the healthy, intentional design that an unconditionally loving creator would have designed for your life, and a more whole perspective. And so it's just so key to be like, yeah, do I have those people that would say it come hell or high water? They would say what's needed to be said, regardless of whether or not I feel hurt or sad or challenged or whatever.
Yeah. And let's take that one step further. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got these false narratives in our head, right? Like that people's jobs are more important than me. And we will, whether we recognize it or not, surround ourselves with people who fit our storyline.
Absolutely.
So we begin to fill our lives with people who are very committed to their jobs, overly so. And it fits our storyline, right? So if we want to combat that storyline, it will entail that we actually have to make choices to surround ourselves with different people that will help influence and change the storyline that the job is not more important than you. And that will take an intentional decision that will not come easily and that will not come naturally. it has to be a choice that we have to make to then begin to surround ourselves with people who are going to help us move and change the narrative.
That's so good. I love that. Yes, there's a challenge for all of you out there.
Yeah,
you have to make a choice.
Yes. And I'm not asking you to do something that I haven't been willing to do myself. This is a real thing that as we walk this life and we want to combat those false narratives in our head, it's going to take an intentional choice. And that might mean putting ourselves in new environments.
It's so good. So back to where you're at. I'm sorry, I bunny trailed us.
That's all good. So let's talk about the three main environmental woundings. And I'm highlighting one, but these are the three. Traumatization, which probably many of you have heard of the word trauma. And trauma, my good buddy Steven says trauma is when you don't get something you want. You don't get what you want. He says, I see it all the time with my kids, right? My kids come to dinner. I say, eat the hamburger. They say, I'm not hungry. And we as parents say, okay, well, if you don't eat your hamburger, you're not going to get the dessert. And as soon as dessert comes out and they say, ooh, can I have a piece? And we say, nope, you didn't eat your hamburger. They lose it, right? Kids, this is normal for kids. And it's like, whoa, this is so crazy. All we're talking about is a piece of dessert and they're blowing it out of proportion.
Totally.
Like this is the end of the world. And that's like a traumatic experience, right? They're not getting what they want. It's a deeply distressing or a deeply disturbing experience. Now, trauma can come in all different shapes and sizes, right? There can be big T trauma where like somebody tragically dies or there's abuse. There can also be small T trauma, like, you're a kid and you move down the street from one house to the next. It's not like a huge bad thing, but for a child, moving is deeply significant. So trauma can come in big T or small T. And that's kind of one that most people are aware of or have heard of before. The second environmental wounding is called deprivation. It's the lack or the denial of something considered to be a necessity. And deprivation is what I was describing of my childhood, right? I had a mom who was fully present from 0 to 5. And then one day she goes back to school and now she's not available.
Right.
I was deprived of a mom. And that's where it happened. Again, it doesn't have to be like something always horrible or tragic.
No.
But it can be a good thing that impacts us negatively.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be some evil villain that swooped into your story suddenly. It was just simply, deprivation came. An actual necessity to have connection with your mothering figure just got wiped off the face of the planet out of nowhere. And the results that there was tremors from that follow out throughout your life without attending to the tremors of that.
Yeah. So let's talk about what those might look like practically for some of these people listening today, right? So it could be that a parent tells them they love you maybe like 3 times in your life.
Yeah.
I've met people, they're like, I've only heard my dad tell me he loves me 3 times.
My dad heard it like once.
Mm-hmm. So that's deprivation, right? It's the lack or denial of something considered to be a necessity. My parent only came to 2 of my baseball games growing up, my whole childhood, and they came to 2. Again, it's like they didn't get these things that are kind of a big deal. So they could also get neglected. They're failed to be cared for properly.
Right.
And that's deprivation as well.
Right.
So that's 2. The third is, maybe you've never heard of this one before, but the third is called privation.
This was pretty profound to me when you brought up privation. That hit me really hard.
Mm-hmm. So it's newer. It's this newer idea, but it's so relevant and it so makes sense of many of our experiences. Privation is the notion of never having had an essential relational experience. Like you didn't have a mom or a dad who was empathetic. You didn't have a mom or a dad who was compassionate. There was no reflection or mirroring from your parents. You'd be upset and your parents would look at you hollow. There was no emotional holding. There was no space to like have your feelings examined or discussed. So this is like a missing psychological experience.
Right. Because you actually, it wasn't there. You weren't, it's almost like the difference goes, if I'm hearing this right, Deprivation is I got it and then it got taken away and that was painful. But what's really hard is privation when it's like it was never there. So I wouldn't know that part of my messiness right now is rooted in something that was fundamentally necessary that didn't exist in the first place.
Absolutely. And a person's reaction to privation when they're told like this thing was essential and you needed it and you never got it, their reaction is like, really? Like
mind blowing.
Seriously? I didn't know that. I had no idea about that, right? Because it was kept private from you.
That was shaking for me when you and I were having a dialogue. It was around I was trying to think of the word of it. Certain aspects of nurture.
Okay.
And you were like, well, you didn't really have this nurture in this way. And I was like, I didn't even realize I needed that. Whoa. Yeah. Oh, that's what's going on for me. I had no idea. Oh, that is really painful. That and then you realize that unconsciously, I always longed for that. But because it didn't exist, I didn't have maybe language for it, but something in my being was needing it. And I can feel all the need throughout the past. But because it wasn't on paper as something that ever happened or was displayed, you were just like, I guess I'm just doing life and this is normal.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This is normal because it's all I know.
Yes. Yep.
And, where attachment figures are neglectful or uninterested or unavailable or unempathetic or unhelpful, this is where privation happens. And they did this experiment with monkeys, adult monkeys. They
took away all their bananas.
Monkeys, that would be traumatic. Oh my gosh, poor monkeys. So they had this monkey, and she gave birth to a baby, and they took the baby away from its mom, and they gave it a metal mom. So they took this metal and shaped it into like the
very
cold
and disconnected mother.
Yeah. So it wasn't even real, but that became its experience of what a mom is like.
Interesting.
So this baby grew up with this metal framed mom. And when they introduced this baby into the colony, it was unable to relate to their peers. It wasn't able to mate.
Did it have violent outbursts and stuff?
This thing didn't understand what cuddling was. They didn't understand how they interacted with each other. And here's the thing about privation. It's not something that can be meditated back into consciousness, right? Like if you had an experience and then you've like repressed it, tools like EMDR or some other kind of therapies can bring it back into consciousness. But with privation, it can't be because it was never activated.
Now it has to be implemented.
Right. So privation, when it comes to privation and therapy for people that have been privated, it's about creating new experiences with them.
I can't help but think like someone's listening and they're like, I had a cold metal monkey mother. Mm-hmm. And they're listening right now and they're like, that's why I can't cuddle. That's why I can't relate. That's why I can't get close to these ways.
Right. Yep.
I had privation.
Although, here's the thing, privated people are not going to exhibit the usual signs of relational trauma. They're not going to be hypervigilant. They're not going to be chronically agitated. They don't have heightened irritability.
Right.
And they're not even unsoothable. Actually, if a privated person is listening right now, they're going to have a flat affect. They're going to have numbness right here.
Yep.
Because they're going to go, that's so weird. I don't even know what that would look like. I don't know what it would look like to have an actual real mother.
Right. I wouldn't know what it would be like to need that. So would you say that privated people like kind of you're talking about they're flatlined in a certain area is what I'm hearing. And they're kind of like, I'm good. I don't need that.
Yeah, because absolutely.
That was part of my thing is I'm like, I don't know why everyone's freaking out and having problems over here. There was so long where I was confused. I couldn't put myself in other people's skin. I was like, why does this disturb you? it doesn't matter if this person doesn't hold you in these ways or doesn't do these things. It's not needed. And then I'm like, oh.
Right. And that's the journey of learning why it's so important, and the journey of what you don't get when you don't get a real mom, or what you don't get when your parents aren't there for you emotionally and mentally. These are the things that a person has to learn or has to be created for that person's experience.
But Barry, so here's a question. If I didn't have it and I was privated, aren't I just better off not needing anything at all? And aren't I just better off that I don't have needs, and then I'm not affectable?
Man, Justin, you are spot on. I love the way you think. You're so right. You have, people that are listening going like, I don't need those things. You're right. You had to learn how to not need any of those things. And you find yourself today, probably, if you're normal and human, like, why would I need those things or make myself weak to need those things?
Yeah.
See that need, see the insecurity of asking for your needs to be met is insecure attachment. And the reason why those things are important is because when we recognize we have those needs and are able to ask for them, we become securely attached to people around us. And when we are securely attached, it is like the number one thing you can do to have a healthy life. I mean, a good relationship is the single best recipe for good health. And it's the most powerful antidote to aging.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you, the fact that quality of our social support predicts our general mortality. How important is secure attachment? Your life depends on it. Your mental health depends on it. This is how important this thing we're talking about is.
Yeah, because what I perceive is that a lot of people that are good and don't need anything, one of the languages I use for that is it's unhealthy self-sufficiency, where we create an island, and on that island we're actually slowly starving. We don't know it, so it's like the starving to death. You're slowly starving to death inside of that, inside of your emotions and stuff. You're like, I don't need to eat. I'm good. I don't need food. That's basically what's being said. If we were to look at it from a physicality perspective, it'd be like, oh, everyone else has been being fed food, but I've never really eaten food. That's not something I've ever had. I don't need food to develop. What we don't realize is that actually we're like 3'5" because we're underdeveloped. We have no idea that that's why we're so short, because our muscles aren't supported. Our bones aren't supported. They didn't get the nutrients that were needed. And so what you realize is that, oh, when I'm living on this island by myself that I think is so secure in my own mind, and you can't figure out why the disasters and chaos are happening all outside of you, it's because this part of you has shut off, and you will actually you'll actually repair the relational things that are happening all around you when you actually enter into a secure attachment style.
Take that illustration. Let's take it one step further. Okay. So we've seen the pictures or videos, the majority of us have seen people who are starving in these third world countries.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So what happens when a person starves long enough? What happens to them? They cease to be hungry.
Yep.
And the same is true for us, right? If we don't get these things as a child, we hunger for them, we long for them. And at some point when they're not met, we cease to be hungry for them. Now, is that because we don't need them? No, that's not it at all. We come to some place where our body shuts down and it makes us so that we don't need those things to survive, because it is moving us into survival.
There it is. Survival mode. The difference between thriving and surviving.
Yes, right there. So one, if you didn't get some of these things growing up that you needed, at some point your body naturally, unconsciously is going to shut the door to needing that. And you're going to move into survival mode. And many of us humans, we're just surviving. We're not thriving.
Right.
So here's the other part I just want to say. Take this same illustration, right? So you've been starving for so long, and finally somebody shows up and they offer you a Big Mac meal from McDonald's, like supersized. Here you go. How much can a starved person actually eat of that?
Oh, not hardly anything at all. You don't have
maybe stomach.
A bite, right. And then your stomach's like overwhelmed. Yes. Your digestive system can't handle it.
Right. So all that to say, if somebody who's listening today is like, oh my gosh, I've been living in survival mode and I want to get those things met. I want to open the doors to that again and become hungry again. You probably will only be able to handle a small dose of that before you're full or you're overwhelmed by it.
Would you say that this is why men or women, are repelled by good relationships? So oftentimes it's rooted in privation type issues or deprivation type issues where it's like, oh, I don't know why, but I just keep picking these types of people. And it's because, I wouldn't even know that I need this thing over here. Or when I do get it, it just feels really weird and awkward to me. So I can't actually handle love that's healthy in these ways and nurturing and caring and invested.
Yeah. So let's just take physical intimacy for just a second, okay?
Right.
So let's say you grow up and your parents don't hug you, they don't put their arms around you, they don't really touch you. There's no like kissing and tucking you in at night. There's none of that, right? So then you get into this relationship with the opposite sex, and you're like, you got a girlfriend and she wants to hold your hand. While that might be something like out of the gate that's like new and fresh and exciting, you don't have a need for it.
Right.
So she'll want to hold your hand. You're like, okay. And then she'll want to keep holding your hand and be like, yeah, my hand's sweaty. No, I don't want to. And I don't want to keep holding hands. That's weird anyways.
Right. I'm not a touchy-feely person.
I'm not a touchy-feely person, right? You've seen this or heard this before, right? And that is because they didn't get that need met, which physical affection is an important need and necessity for a child. But they didn't get that met, so they moved to survival mode. So how did they begin to incrementally bring that back into this relationship or bring it into this relationship for the first time? How did they begin to open the door to allow themselves to need physical touch?
That's a great question. It starts
Go ahead.
Well, it starts with having a spouse like Abby who just is freaking out and is like, I need touch right now. And you're like, no, I don't want it. Fine. She's melting down. All right. I'll let you touch. I'll let us cuddle. All right. Let's do this cuddle thing. I'll put up with it. And you're like, oh, I kind of like this. Okay. I guess maybe I need it too. Can I have a cuddle now? No, but give us the technical.
Isn't the human mind process, isn't that fascinating?
Give us the technical of how we get. Do you have thoughts on how we get there? Probably.
Yeah. Well, this is that starved person, right?
Yeah.
That they get given like the Big Mac meal supersized. That's like Abby, right? Yeah. Abby's like, listen, I'll touch you, I'll hold you, I'll cuddle with you. And all you might be able to take in right out of the gate is just holding hands for 5 minutes.
Totally.
Or sitting on the couch for 5 minutes. You might not be able to sit through a whole movie hand in hand, arm in arm. You might not be able to do that because it's too much for you to take in.
That was one of the messes in our early marriage that we've had to go through, where we had a bad dance where Abby felt like I was constantly rejecting her when I didn't want to be physical a bunch in public and touchy-feely type stuff. And I felt overwhelmed. I felt trapped. I felt paralyzed. There were a lot of those emotions that happened for me that I'm like, I don't get it. I don't want it. I can't do it. So we both were feeling super violated by each other's like need. My thought was my need to breathe and get out of this situation. And then she's feeling rejected and needing some closeness inside of it. And so that was a really big bad dance that we got into.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so this is part of that is the inability, or you can't stomach as much as what's available to you.
Right.
Right. So that's part of this is privation. Moving out of that is slow incremental like bites each day that make your stomach bigger to be able to handle more at a time.
And that's something that I progressively did, is where I was like, okay, she really needs this. Let me figure out how to hug her. I wasn't against hugging. But how to give like that cuddle. Like, okay, I'm going to give some cuddle time. Yep. Okay, I can't do anymore. And it was baby steps for me on how long those things would begin to happen. And even like, okay, because she always wanted to like grab me and make out with my face right in like a line at like Ralph's grocery store. And I'm like, what? This is so like freaking me out, and this PDA is overwhelming me, and it's like, and so it's like, oh, I'd give her a little kiss and let the kiss happen, and then I'd be like, okay, I have to pull away now. This is what we got away with here in this moment.
Yep. Again, even that you bring up such a great point, Justin. Thank you for bringing this up. Like we might be okay out of the gate with doing something in private, like in our own home, like holding hands on the couch with nobody watching, which is a totally different thing than holding hands out in public.
Yeah.
That's two totally different experiences that a person might be able to take in somewhat at home privately, but not out in public. And that's the growth process for us all. And I'm just using this one physical touch as an example, but this is in all these areas of growth and creating new experiences where we can take more and more of it in.
That's great. Did you want to move on? I wanted to make sure that I didn't hijack it over in that area too much.
Oh man, you're great. I just think, privation's more new. Traumatization and deprivation are still two normal human experiences that, again, I just want to highlight because they're so profound when our relationships get into struggles, when we start having issues in our marriage. Oftentimes these are what is going on under the surface.
Can you describe, if you could take a moment, the different attachment styles really quick, just to like maybe highlight to people like, oh, this is probably my attachment style, and this is probably what's leading to some of the messes in my intimate relationships.
Mm-hmm. Attachment is fascinating. There's so many books on it. You can easily Google it and find books and all kinds of stuff written about attachment theory. So secure attachment is the ideal, right? When a child grows up, their primary caregivers are there whenever they call. When that doesn't happen, kids respond in a couple of different ways. One way is they have an anxious attachment. Anxious attachment is they become like visibly, you can see it externally, you can see them anxious on the outside.
They're having a meltdown.
Yeah. So you can see it. Yeah, absolutely. So you can see it in like a mom and baby. Mom's holding baby, and they did this study. So they had the mom come into this room. There's this pile of toys. So mom sets the baby at the pile of toys, and the baby starts playing with it. And the baby's constantly looking up, making sure mom's still there. And then they tell mom, okay, leave the room. So mom stands up, leaves the room, and the anxious baby crawls or walks or runs to the door and cries at the door, bangs on the door, mom, 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 mom. So then the researchers tell mom, okay, go back in the room. So mom goes back in the room. She picks the baby up. And as soon as she picks the baby up, the baby wants put down. So she puts the baby down. And as soon as she puts the baby down, the baby wants back up. And there's this like, I'm so mad that you left me. And please don't ever leave me again, all at the same time.
Would that be kind of known as a push-pull?
Right. So you can vacillate between a push-pull. That's totally normal and common with anxious attachment. And anxious attached people usually look at life through the lens of it's all my fault. So mom left because I must have did something. It's not because the researcher told her to leave. It's probably something I did. So the anxiously attached people think if I could just learn how to say that better, if I could just learn how to do that right, if I could just figure out how to get myself in a better place, then this all will work itself out and all will be better. So anxiously attached people live in this constant state of, I got to do this better, or this thing is my fault. I'm the issue here. So that's one way. And I'm really generalizing this, so I apologize. The other way that an attachment style will kind of get dysfunctional is becoming an avoidant attachment. So children with an avoidant attachment tend to avoid parents or caregivers. They show no preference between a caregiver or a complete stranger. So same study, mom and baby come into the room. She puts the baby down to play with toys. The researcher tells mom, okay, leave the room. Mom leaves the room and the baby looks up, watches mom leave, shuts the door, and it goes back to playing with the toys. No crying, no fits, no going to the door. They just sit there and play with the toys. The researcher tells the mom to go back in. She comes back in and sits down. The baby sees her sit down and goes back to playing with the toys. They don't show any preference for the parent. Now, here's the crazy part. They do a brain scan of the child, of the anxious child and the avoidant child, and the brain scans show the exact same thing. So
that's bananas.
Yeah. Externally, the anxious attached child is externally showing the anxiety. and the avoidant attached child is showing the exact same thing, but it's all internal.
Deep internalization. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in our culture, it's very normal and common that females have more of an an anxious attachment and men have an avoidant attachment.
And
I know it's generalizing.
But that was
but
even
that's
Abby and I.
kind of right.
Yeah.
So that's very normal and common. And the research shows, you can see it if you check out any of the books or any of the writings on it, anxious and avoidant attachment figures or people are drawn to each other.
Yeah. And they're both, again, they're still rooted in insecure attachment.
Yes.
And these are just an expression of my insecure attachment. I'm still freaking out one way or another, whether it's inside or external, but I'm still freaking out about the disconnect that's happening right here. And my coping mechanism is this. And then we go find each other. And why do we go find each other, Barry? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, again, I think right out of the gate, there's like this magnetism that happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the anxious attached person says, oh, look how much they got their life together. They're so organized. They've got like their whole life figured out and they're just so put together, and they're so drawn to that because an anxious attached person seems more like internally scattered and a lot moving, right? And the avoidant attached figure looks and says, wow, that person's cool. They're like drawn to me. That feels good. Until they start bleeding into their really put together world. Then they're like, why do you have to keep getting into all my business? And the anxious attached person says, why are you pushing me away? And the avoidant says, gosh, you're like knocking all the stuff that I've got all perfectly organized. You're pushing it, you're knocking them over. And the anxious attached person's going, why do you not want to be close to me anymore? And it begins to spiral the other way.
So what he said is, let me explain to you Abby and Justin's relationship real quick.
Oh my gosh. I'm sure there's so many people listening going, no, he's describing my relationship. That's how it was for me too. Because it's normal.
Is there any other expression besides those two?
Yeah, I mean, there's a disorganized attachment. And that's where children display like a confusing mix of behavior. They can feel very disorganized, more dazed and confused. They, when you feel or when you have a disorganized attachment, you can't make sense of so much. It's just linked to this having an inconsistent caregiver behavior.
Is disorganized attachment like almost like chaos and aloofness? Is that kind of what that is?
Yep. That would be a great way to describe it. So the parents, they might have been a source of comfort and fear. Right. It's disorganized because like on one hand, mom would hug me and then the next hand she'd abuse me. So disorganized is like, I don't know if you're safe or if you're not safe because both seem to be real.
How does that manifest in a relationship? Like, is it like if someone's on the other end of that, what would that look like? Do you know?
Yeah, great question. For one, a disorganized attachment really gives as I work with disorganized attachment people, you can really feel the experience of it. You can feel their disorganization palpable in the room with you. They're saying, oh, I so badly want to be close and I want to be safe. And I know you're not safe all at the same time. And so there's this talk about vacillation. It's almost like next level vacillation. Because, again, their caregivers have been safe and dangerous, and that does something significant internally to a person.
Wow. Yeah. And is there any other ones? So avoidant, anxious, disorganized.
Anxious, avoidant, secure. Those are kind of the main three. Disorganized, there's very few of them. And ambivalent attachment. These become very distressed when the parent leaves. The ambivalent is kind of like anxious attachment, but it's just a very small percentage of the population. They had, poor parent availability. These children couldn't depend on their primary caregiver. I would say if I've worked with a population, people that have come through like foster homes and it was like a bad experience at a foster home, this is where I see some of that attachment. Yeah.
So when someone who's listening to this, they're looking at it and they're like, oh, I can kind of identify some of these areas. Like, What's the value of understanding attachment styles and understanding some of this information ultimately when it plays out?
Well, let's talk about it from a personal level first. So I was a pretty avoidant, attached person when my wife and I ended up in therapy. I was so shut off and numb and so disconnected from her. I was very avoidant. That is how I loved her best. I loved my wife best by staying away. Because I thought if I got closer, or if I talked more, it would make matters worse.
Yeah,
so if you are listening to me today and you're like, oh, me too. I keep my distance and I keep my mouth shut, and that's the way I love her and keep the peace. Yeah, that's an avoidant attachment. One, just finding the language to make sense of my experience. There's so much power and help in that. Once we can put a word to an experience, it's like, oh my gosh, that helps so much. So just finding language for what you're going through in your relationship or in your life is a huge deal. Secondly, I would just say this helps you in the journey. Like, what do I need to focus on, or where do the issues lie? Attachment would be one of the number one places I would encourage anyone who's struggling to look into, because our attachment style plays in a lot to all the distress.
Well, I think and I think that's so great. I think that a lot of times our momentum in healing doesn't actually happen until we can get out of the extreme vilification that we do with everyone. And so what I mean by that is, like, we look at the people around us and we go, oh, I'm upset because of them. And here's an area where we go, oh, this is actually a great spot to start in personal ownership, where we go, oh, I've had so many problems in these specific relationships. What about potentially my attachment style has exacerbated the messes and brought the intensity inside of it, or the disconnect inside of it? Is there an attachment style that I have that causes me to vilify a person and think that all their behavior is horrible because there's something that's not resolved within me in my attachment style? And is there something about my attachment style that could be exacerbating an experience for someone else inside of these primary attachments and close attachments, where I can go, okay, I can not only take ownership for some of the pain that I'm putting on someone else and saying this pain is because of them. And we can go, oh, that pain is because of my history and because of an attachment style and because of the messages that keep getting sent to me as we're doing these dances. And I'm provoking pain potentially in other people's worlds that I don't need to, if I could see how to maybe show up and find some healing in my attachment style that would actually bring some soothing to someone else's experience.
Yes. Amen to all that. Yes. We get victim mindsets. We get vengeful mindsets.
Yeah.
We get all kinds of these dysfunctional ways of thinking. And it comes back to a lot of these woundings that we talked about today, right? Trauma happened, and so now I've got some post-traumatic stress. Or deprivation happened, so now I'm just ready for everyone to abandon me at some point. Yeah. Or I've been through privation, so I don't even know what it looks like to have something healthy. I've never seen it. And these things are all playing into the dysfunctional mindsets that we can find ourselves with.
And what I hear you saying is that there's actually healing for all of this.
Oh, listen, the good news today, everyone, attachments can be restructured. Attachments can be repaired. This is the wonderful news that the research and evidence and experience tells us these things all can change. Our attachments to others can become secure and healed and wonderful.
I love that, Barry. This is so good. I love that I got to spend this time with you in here. As we're getting towards wrapping up, I just was curious, is there a place that people, like, how could they get in contact with you or learn more about what you do? Is there something like that?
Yeah, well, for one, attachment and all this stuff that we talked about today, there's a lot of writing out there about it, so you can find some good books.
Do you have a book that you would recommend that you're like, oh, this is a really good one? Or
yeah, there's a book that I've recommended a bunch called Attached. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but that's a great book to look into, and it just kind of cracks the door open into what more about attachment. We just scratched the surface today too, for the record. Like, there's so much more here that we just are scratching the surface on.
And I know that I've heard that there are some attachment books that kind of vilify avoidance a little bit more, maybe in the way that they're written. I don't know. And if you do bounce into a book like that, you get to go, I'll take this with a grain of salt. It's validating one side maybe, or something like that.
Absolutely.
But so Attached is a good one.
Yep. Yeah. Sue Johnson, who is kind of this creator of emotion-focused therapy, she has written a bunch on attachment. I would highly recommend any of Sue Johnson's book.
Awesome.
And if you're a couple listening and you want to read a book together, she and a man named Kenny Sandifer wrote a book called Creative for Connection. Highly recommend. And so that's a great book. And for more on me, I have a website, blueskyintensivetherapy.com. I, work with couples and individuals that have been through these woundings. And so you can find more information about what I do or myself there.
I love that. That's great. Barry, I really appreciate that you take time with all of us, and talk about this. Is there anything beyond that, like any final things you'd like to say, or any homework that you would suggest giving?
Well, for one, I just want to be an advocate for mental health. If you're struggling individually or in a relationship, I just want to encourage you to get help. I was a great example of not wanting help. And my wife loved me enough to keep on me to help me get through the door. And so I just want, if you're out there, and if you're a guy, especially, and you're like, yeah, counseling's not for me, or doing what Justin and Abby do is not for me, I want to ask you, please, to reconsider, because all of it has been so deeply transformative for me. And I just want to encourage that, and just put a good word in for mental health in counseling. And if you're struggling, or if you feel like you're going crazy in your relationship, it's normal. And getting counseling now is more normal than it ever has been.
And I'll say this,
I just want to encourage it.
I'll add this to it, because, obviously, EFT is a great therapy. And if you guys don't have people that you know how to connect to in an area or find, and you're just like scared of it, even if, I had early on in the conversation, there's been hesitancy for some people because they get into maybe counseling scenarios where it's talk therapy and they're still in same cycles long term. But there's a starting point. And to everyone who starts in some place, I'm like, yeah, but at least you sat down and started the conversation. And that might start up the wheels for you that go, okay, I just felt safe enough to share. I finally started like becoming self-aware. And then I started like taking that momentum into other modalities or experiences that were necessary, because at each phase of our life, sometimes it's just a baby step of like, I just found someone that could listen. And that was really powerful for that season. That was a necessity for that season. They just heard me. They couldn't fix anything, or they didn't necessarily give me any tools. But that just listening to me was a profound and powerful moment, because maybe you didn't talk ever before, or you weren't listened to in the past, and they just created a safe space for that. That's profound. So
it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be the expert. You can go in there and say, I don't know what's going on. That's why I'm talking to you. You're going to help me figure out what's going on. Wonderful. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
The other thing I would just say, if I was you and listening to this today, I would do research on one thing that kind of stood out. Like if you heard one of the things we talked about today, whether it's trauma or deprivation or privation, look more into that. Find more information about it. See if that is something that you experienced and how it affects a person and what's normal, because that might make sense of a lot of what you're experiencing in your relationships today. And that could be significantly helpful.
That's awesome. Well, Barry, thank you for spending time with us, giving us this in this space. I know that you're going to be as much of a gift to other people as you've been to me, just even in this little bit of time you've gotten to connect with our listeners. And to everybody out there, my Connected Life peeps, I love you. Thanks for participating with us. If you got anything out of this episode, rate, review, subscribe, and share. When you share this, people hear this information and their lives get changed. And so even if you don't know how to recommunicate what was said here, you can hand it off to people and they can go on their own personal journey of exploring their own hearts. And don't forget, Justin and Abby, that's abi.com, to get onto the pathway to freedom. Only a few more days left. at our courses page. So with all that said, Barry, you want to say goodbye?
Thank you, guys. It was such a treat to get to chat about all this stuff today. Just blessed that you would spend your time with us.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Peace out.